Good afternoon, East Goshen. Hope you're having a great Tuesday so far. Hopefully you're warm and dry inside on this snowy and windy day in Beloit. We are diving into the book of Ruth this week, which we should be able to work all the way through by the end of the week. Work at your own pace as usual, but it's only 4 chapters long, so we're going to divide that up between today and Thursday. Today we're only going to cover chapters 1 and 2, and then Thursday we'll cover the latter half of the book. This book is unique, much like Esther. It hardly mentions God. Unlike Esther never mentions the name of God, but Ruth hardly mentions the Lord by name. In fact, the narrator never mentions God. It's only the characters in conversation that mention God specifically. And so it's, again, another strange little book, but it provides us a broader conversation about what God is doing in the lives of ordinary people and how he works out his plan of salvation. So at the beginning of the book here, we're introduced to Naomi and her husband Elimelech, who have 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And so they travel to the land of Moab because this is during the time of the judges. Israel is an unstable mess. And so they're amongst the Canaanites. They're in one nation among many Canaanite nations. And apparently there was a famine at the time because they leave their home country in order to move to Moab. Now the sons of Naomi and Elimelech marry Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth, who the book is named for. Unfortunately and tragically, both the sons of Naomi and her husband are all killed. They don't really give us much information about their deaths, but they all die tragically. And so Naomi is left with her daughters-in-law and a lack of food. She hears, verse 6 of chapter 1, that in Israel, God has provided graciously for his people through an abundance of food. And so she decides that she's leaving Moab and she's going to go back to her home country, back to Bethlehem, where she originally resided. And so that's where we find ourselves at the very beginning of the book. Naomi is about to head out, and she gives her daughters-in-law the option to come with her or to stay in Moab and to try to remarry. Orpah decides to take her leave, but Ruth says, "Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where I have loyalty for you, my mother-in-law. Even though we're not blood related, I am committed to this family relationship, and I'm going to follow you wherever you would lead." And so Ruth's demonstrating loyalty here, and they move back to the land of Judah, back to Bethlehem. And that's where Ruth meets Boaz, who is a local farmer, and it turns out a kinsman redeemer of Naomi. We'll talk more about that on Thursday. But it turns out that Boaz is a righteous man. She's walking through the grain fields, and even though she is a foreigner, even though she is a widow, Boaz provides her opportunity to glean from the harvest of his fields, to pick from his fields. Because this is commanded in Scripture. You look at Deuteronomy chapter 19, and this is commanded. You are supposed to allow foreigners and the marginalized in Jewish society to be able to pick from your fields, to glean part of the crops that you have raised. You're not supposed to pick everything clean. You're supposed to allow people to come in and to benefit from the good gifts that God has given you, the bountiful harvest of your fields. And so Boaz is a righteous man, and he allows Ruth the opportunity to come and glean from his fields, and even gives her grain in order to feed her family. And so that's where we find ourselves. This is the first half of the book of Ruth. And I want to focus on Ruth chapter 2, verse 12, where Boaz has met Ruth. They've discussed their situations with one another, and he says to her, "May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Boaz knows of Ruth's faithfulness, her loyalty. He himself is a generous and faithful and righteous man. And so the characters thus far in the narrative, they are fulfilling their obligations as commanded in Scripture. They are in the daily, everyday tasks of life, following what God has for them. Even a Moabite woman who has decided she's going to follow the Lord, the God of Israel, and follow her mother-in-law back to whatever may befall them. And so here at the very beginning, we get this picture of God's movement in the lives of ordinary, everyday people like you and I. It is in these little moments, these moments where we choose loyalty, where we choose trust, where we choose to follow one another and guide one another and help one another, where we choose generosity and righteousness in the little decisions in life that God is on the move. And as we'll see for Thursday, God is continuing to work out his plan of redemption, of salvation. But here at the very beginning, it's emphasizing the importance of your everyday little decisions that can change the life of someone around you. Things that you may think are relatively insignificant. Your faithfulness in the small things can result in eternal consequences, eternal blessing for the people around you. By choosing the life that God has called us to in the mundane, everyday things of life, we can completely change the life of another person just by our small acts of faithfulness. So, what is God calling you to do in your day-to-day life? How are you being faithful in the small things, in the everyday decisions, where you choose generosity, where you choose loyalty, where you choose to give freely of yourself? Think through that, pray through that. God, how am I being faithful in the small things? And we'll see that on Thursday, they can have eternal impact in the world. So thank you for joining me this afternoon. I will see you Thursday, and we will wrap up the book of Ruth. Have a great afternoon. I will see you next time.